The season ended now. It's like a couple of weeks. It feels like a lifetime ago. And so I thought I'll try to come up with different ideas of identifying themes to explore in this off season between now and when the Euros start and when the Copa America start. There's some World Cup qualifiers right now. It's just football nonstop. It's just not, club football, which is more my passion. I love football of all kinds, but um, I think with the limited amount of time we all have, it helps when there's quality in the football you're watching, right? And I think what's probably making it a bit tricky for me, at least if I can speak for myself, is when I'm watching football that is um, quite one-sided. A lot of these international games tend to be a little bit hard to watch, because you're watching teams, countries that are more stacked and more developed, playing against countries that have little to no resources in terms of talent wise. So anyway, I thought today I'm going to do a player review. So do like an Arsenal season review, but going through the positions, player by player. And it's an idea that I thought would be interesting because I've been kind of, I've had time to kind of like decompress and get over the fact that Manchester City won the Premier League again. And and I mean, they're a good team. I, I don't even want to go into this whole, 115 charges and them suing um, the Premier League to try and create more distraction. So I won't go into the Manchester City part of it, but I just wanted to focus more on the Arsenal side of it and kind of like look at some of the players because some of these kids, a lot of them actually worked really hard and gave us a season to remember as Arsenal fans. And so I'll go through them player by player. And I'll go with starters, and then I'll probably transition to some of the backup players in those positions where possible. Those who at least made a contribution. I won't necessarily talk about people like Cedric Suarez or Mohamed El Neni. But for example, in the goalkeeping situation, I will talk about Ramsdale, and in midfield, I'll talk about people like Vieira and Emil Smith Rowe as I go through some of these reviews. I will try to stay away from giving. Um, I'll try to stay away from giving like a number grade, but I actually, you know what? I'll commit. I'll flip it. I'll do a number grade as well, um, and justify why that number grade is being given. So, goalkeeper, I think David Raya. I think for a season where he came in and it looked to many people like Ateta had stabbed one of our darlings in the back. That would be Ramsdale. I think David Raya, for me, definitely had a 7.5 to an 8 of a season. Um, and I think I think 7 in terms of his performances, and I think I would go towards an 8 due to the personality that he showed. I think a lot of us know that Aaron Ramsdale is a personality, is a big personality, and he can stand up against any environment, except for maybe in some games where he makes a mistake. But Aaron Ramsdale is like a brave man. Like he has that big ego, bravado type of thing, and he can give it to the fans as much as they give it to him. But I think David Raya gave Arsenal something that I hadn't seen before in an Arsenal team. And it was not so much shot stopping than it was like an aura and a presence in the way teams approached us, like the way we were defending with and without the ball was, I think, enabled by David Raya's presence. Some people could point to some, high profile errors here and there, but there were few and far in between, and a few times I think the worst ones were in the Spurs game that we won, but I think some people could point to the one at Sevilla, not Sevilla, sorry, at yeah, Sevilla, no, Lens, in the earlier part of the Champions League. But then he also kind of like had probably the biggest Arsenal goalkeeper performance in a penalty shootout against Porto with those two saves, and he just basically gave us an ability to play to a new template. Um, and I can't imagine what it must be like to be a player um, who has to win over your own fans as well as the broader world of critics out there. So I just think because of that, that's why I'm like, I gave him a 7, but I think the personality side of it, the character side of it, for me, brings him up to an 8 because I think we underestimate how much backing really helps players. And I think you will see it when I talk about someone like Kai Havertz, you know, who showed us a lot of personality later on in the season. But in the first part of the season, similarly to David Raya, there were questions about why the signing was made and all these different things. But I think Kai Havertz, like most infield players, or he had a lot of bites at the cherry, whereas like Raya plays in a position where um, the mistakes tend to live long in people's minds. People don't remember strikers or midfielders when they miss a pass or they miss a tackle, they miss a defensive assignment, or they miss a goal. Like they remember that in that week, but they don't remember that like too long beyond the week itself. So I think David Raya gets an 8 for me. I'm going to try and rattle through these, but I'm talking longer on Raya because I think a lot of people are probably going to argue the most with that rating. Whichever rating you give for Raya is probably going to give people a lot to talk about. Going to right back, Ben White. Ben White, for me, for a variety of reasons, deserves a 9 out of 10 season. And my reason for this is that Ben White basically carried us, in the right back position. He carried Arsenal's wishes and dreams with him, and he did not disappoint. And he played quite a lot of this season with some strapping on his right leg around the knee. Um, he was consistently in the 8 or higher category in terms of his performances. And he might have had like a few weeks in the middle of the winter, in the winter months, where he was starting to show signs of fatigue because he was basically playing all the time because Timber got injured in the first game of the season. And I think it kind of helped. I know this is not something a lot of people would wish on any player, that he has his national team coach turn their back on him. But Gareth Southgate turning his back on Ben White at the World Cup kind of helped Arsenal out this year because that meant Ben White didn't have to go on England camps during international breaks. He was allowed to at least rest, which meant he was able to be used a hell of a lot by Arsenal. And minutes wise, he was one of Arsenal's most used players. He played, let me be sure, 2,988 minutes, just under 3,000 minutes. That's a lot of football. That's just Premier League alone. That's not adding Champions League. He played 37 Premier League matches, started 35. And then you add basically all the Champions League matches he played, and usually played 90 minutes. The few games he didn't play 90 minutes, he played 60 or something like that in the Premier League. when Tomiyasu started to come back from injury. And if you think about it, Ben White played as many minutes as someone like Gabriel, who always was playing as well. The only player who in the defense played more than Ben White is William Saliba, because he played all the Premier League minutes available, basically 3,420 minutes. Saliba played. Um, and then if you think about the problems on the other side, in the other fullback flank, minutes were shared there tremendously. Like, you have Zinchenko, who I should probably transition to now. Zinchenko probably gave us a 6.5 season. He was good when he was good, but the fact that he was entrusted in the crunch time, clutch times of the season, um, and even by his own admission, he didn't have the season that he would have wanted to build on from the season he had last year. Ended up with about just a little over 1,700 minutes. He's played 26 Premier League games. No, played 27 Premier League games, started 20. And that role was split. And so 946 of those minutes at left back went to Kivio, who actually I'm going to grade him on a slight curve as the youngster that he still is in the squad, as well as center back playing left back. I think he will get a 7 from me, because he was never supposed to play 946 minutes in the Premier League game, most of those games as a starter. He had 11 Premier League starts this year, this last season, Jakub Kivio. And then Tomiyasu had 10. So basically, there was a division of minutes there. Like, it was a proper timeshare between Tomiyasu, Kivio, and Zinchenko at left back, because remember, Jurian Timber got hurt in the first game of the season. So there's not a whole lot to talk about there at left back. I think this probably the one position Arsenal need to figure out going into next season the most. At center back, I think these dudes, for me, but I'm gonna do them as a duo rather than as a single. I think both of them for me are 10s. Saliba played every single minute of the Premier League. Gabriel, after missing the first 3 or so games due to potential move to Saudi Arabia, and maybe his head was a little turned or whatever, I don't even know. We don't know. Maybe that will be something that will all be shared one day in the future about what happened there with Gabriel. And I think he is definitely one guy who you can't rate Gabriel without looking at what he does for Saliba. Like, both of them, there'll be games where Gabriel might have a boneheaded decision, but equally, Saliba will have a few games like that too. And then Gabriel is between the two of them, you have a pairing that you just can't live. You can't live in dark times with those two guys in your defense. They're good on a day when you have the ball, because they can pass the ball. They're comfortable with it at their feet. Offensive teams, opposition teams can't cheat and say, let's let them have the ball, because they will hurt you. But at the same time, if you have to play a little deep and you have to defend your box, they can do that. I think Gabriel is probably more backs against the wall defender at this stage of their careers. I think Gabriel is probably the slightly better backs against the wall defender, whereas Saliba is, streets ahead of Gabriel when it comes to, front-footed defending. So calm, makes great decisions most of the time. And it's hard to think that the dude was 22 this season. Played every single minute. I don't remember an Arsenal defender or a player that important being available for every single minute of the game of the season, every single minute. Um, Gabriel was not too far behind in his minutes. It was 3,044, and I think the reason he played in some of those games that he wasn't started. He started 34 games. He played a couple of sub appearances in those earlier games, and the only other time also I remember him being substituted in the Premier League was on last day when he hurt his shoulder against Everton. But yeah, both of them for me get tens. Midfield is another area where Arsenal will probably need to to get to get some reinforcement, especially maybe not so much the player behind Declan Rice as a number six because Jorginho. I wouldn't complain if Arsenal got a number six, but I don't think if they don't get a number six, it's going to be the end of the world. I think I think they do need though somebody else who can play in that number eight position if Emil Smith Rowe won't be trusted and whatnot. Um, so Jorginho would be for me a seven. I wish we were able to use him for a bit longer in the season. Um, but I think he gave us very important minutes, in the new year. He played some part, very small part in the beginning part of the season. We took a bit too long, in my opinion, to find Jorginho and to be comfortable with using Rice in the left eight more often, because I think we were taking a bit long to move Kai Havertz to the number nine. So I think it was like a domino effect. Um, that kind of like led to the delay. But I do now think, we are now in a better place for having gone through those struggles. Obviously you wish to not to go through the struggles, um, but sometimes you just can't avoid them. You just can't avoid them. So yeah, I will say Jorginho is a seven, but purely because of minutes played. Um, I don't think you can be able to give him more than a seven based on the minutes he played. He didn't play enough for me, even though I don't think this was all his fault. I think this was maybe Arteta trying to find a new balance to the team, and then eventually settles on Jorginho. And I think Jorginho's long run or continued run in the team coincides with Havertz being a number nine and Havertz's uptick in his performances. Jorginho played 921 minutes, only 10 starts. That's the reason I'm giving him a seven. I think he could have given us more, and he didn't. Maybe partly not his fault, but the fact that he played in the Premier League so little minutes, that to me, is hard for me to give him more than a seven. Declan Rice, debut season, two different positions. I think I'm going to give him a nine. I know I think at this stage of his career, he's a better number six than he's a number eight. But he played so many minutes in the eight position, and I don't think he's quite the number eight. Like he did, I would say, the six things at a level 10. Like the six part of his game, or like the number six role, I think Declan Rice is a 10 out of 10 number six. But I think I give him a nine because in the eight position, I think he scored more often an 8, 7.5, 8 out of 10. Eventually, his numbers got better when we started to involve him in set pieces. So his assist numbers got better. I think a lot of the time it was from set pieces rather than open play. And then obviously sometimes combining with Trossard, who can be very good for anyone's assist numbers because Trossard is arguably the best finisher in the team. So Rice is a 9 for me. Um, Martin Odegaard, I think, is a 10. The reason I would give him a 10 is because this guy, he is the most two-sided creative player I've ever seen in the Premier League. I can't think of a elegant player who is as two-sided. Both he plays both sides of the ball incredibly well. Um, he is one of those two-way players who I think if he doesn't play, we don't just miss his creativity, we miss his defensive work. He is an elite defender, Martin Odegaard, and creates at the highest of clips as well. I don't think he is probably. I know Bukayo Saka is, like, according to many people, including myself, I would say, like, maybe the most important player offensively, and actually Saka's numbers are also insane defensively. But I think Odegaard is. I'm just talking tangibles at this moment, but if you want to add even the intangibles, that's why for me he gets a 10. Um, I think he's a nasty little man too. Like, I think people get fooled by the blonde hair and they see him as like this nice dude. He is a ruthless winner, Martin. And yeah, for me, he's a 10 out of 10 this last season. He didn't score, like, is at the highest of clips like he did the previous season, but it was always going to be difficult for him to repeat that, because what he did last year, not even Frank Lampard, the most goal scoringest midfielders of all time in the Premier League. He's never, like, Frank Lampard used to top up his goals in like Cole Palmer style with penalties. Martin Odegaard scored last year as a midfielder that many open play goals. It's ridiculous what he did last season. And like the season 22-23. So 23-24 was always going to be a dip in terms of goal scoring. But chance creation, defensive work, the man is just crazy, crazy talented. He's got an engine for days. So yeah, I would give him a 10. And I think that's basically the Arsenal midfield. But of course, there's Thomas Partey, but I think Thomas Partey had a non-season for me, and as a result, I'll give him a 5. I know, it could be worse. Maybe if other people were having this conversation with me, but Thomas Partey, I'll rate him as a 5. The reason being, I think it became evident when he started playing for Arsenal, like how vertical the the team became. I think when I listen to some of my favorite Arsenal podcasters talk about Partey's influence in the Arsenal team, they say, yeah, he makes us play like the team from last year. But I think what's likely to happen anytime you have a player who makes you go, accelerate the speed at which you play, he's also very likely going to then impact the game going the other way. It's going to be more Liverpool rather than Man City. I feel like Thomas Partey gives us the more Liverpool bits of who we are, because he makes us more direct. He gets the ball to the front players quicker. And because of that, the ball is likely also, especially if the front players are not safe with it, the ball is likely then to be traveling back this way. It's almost like what's happening in the NBA. If you think about basketball, right? The more pacey the game is, the more opportunities for shots in both directions. There's more possessions. There's more possession changes between the two teams, and that's the game Jurgen Klopp plays. It looks uncomfortable for an Arsenal team because we had gotten so secure in the months that Partey wasn't playing. But I think we were also sacrificing a few other things in those moments, and that's why it took us a while. If you think about, like, our acceleration and our second part of the season, in points gained and wins and all of that. Like, we got better in the second part of the season before Partey came back, and then we continued to play when he got back too. But I think what he did for us was he made us a little bit more direct, and so I'll give him 5 for, for the games he actually played. But like, I think for the games he actually played, probably he gets a 6.5 ish. But because of the absence as well, like, you can't trust Thomas Partey's body at the moment. And so his body, and which is, this is not his fault, but I just feel like you can't continue to have a player in the squad who's paid at that level and who is that good not available as much as Thomas Partey is not available. That's just really difficult for the team to live with, and it's hard to win when you're missing a player of that quality for the times that he's unavailable. And so I'm gonna move on there. I'll give him a 5. ESR, Vieira. They're the players I'll give 5s to, if I'm being honest. I don't want to talk too long there. It's kind of similar for both. They lost an opportunity with Kai Havertz going up front. They could have, capitalized, but both of these players' health, as well as maybe a little bit of training, as it's being reported recently about Vieira. But I think Vieira was actually injured quite a lot. And in the 2 years he's been at Arsenal, he's had some very badly timed injuries, almost like ESR / Reece Nelson before this last season and a half. Reece Nelson was always injured too, including at times when he could have been loaned out and then he ends up staying because the injury. And then probably could have been sold, and a window to sell him got closed because injuries. And then I'm going to say, actually, let me just go into that before I go into the main guys up front. Reece, same for me. He'd be like a 5 because gave us nothing. There was minutes, could have been Nwaneri for how much he didn't play. Ed Nketiah played quite a lot in the first half of the season. And I think you could associate a lot of our struggles in the beginning. They were not solely on him, but they were more stylistic. And, his style as a number 9 didn't work as well for this team. But I'm going to give him a bit more than Reece and Vieira and ESR because he actually was trusted, then lost his job. So I'll give him a 6. I'll give Eddie a 6, Reece Nelson a 5. Because Eddie was trusted and he actually played over 1,000 minutes for the team overall. He played close to like Jesus minute. I think Jesus played like 300 more minutes in the Premier League than Eddie or something like that. Ed Nketiah, 1,082 minutes. Gabriel Jesus, 1,478 minutes. So yeah, it's just around 300 minutes difference between them two. If you think about that, then I think Eddie's time at Arsenal has come to an end. I don't think I'm revealing anything there. It's not breaking news. I think it's time for Eddie to make a career for himself somewhere else. And I would say Reece Nelson the same. He's going to be harder to get rid of, or at least to sell. Emil Smith-Rowe and Vieira, it'll be hard for me to see a way of both of them staying next season. But I think they're both, of the 4 players that I've talked about in terms of like being trusted with minutes, I think the midfield two have a better chance of staying at Arsenal beyond this summer. Vieira and Smith-Rowe, because there's a lot of potential in them two that hasn't been tapped into, whereas Eddie has been given minutes at Arsenal. It doesn't seem like Arsenal is going to suit him. I think he will be good somewhere else. I think if he goes to a Newcastle or Brighton, Aston Villa even, I think he'd be good in an Emery team because Emery plays with 2 strikers. I don't think Eddie's a lone striker, even though he's a quintessential striker, like plays up top. I think he needs other players around him, like Jermaine Defoe kind of style. I think he can do well in a 2. And if he does in a 1, he might be a bit better off in a 3-4-2-1 with like the number 10s tucked in, playing closer to him. But with him playing within the width of the 18-yard box and playing very, very close to goal. I think Arteta's requirements are a bit too demanding for what Eddie is able to do at this stage of his development. Which is not, it's not a knock on him. It's just, I think it's a culture fit. It's a stylistic fit. I think he fits the culture. Sorry, actually, I think he fits like mentality wise. He's a good guy, according to all reports that I've read about him. Arteta speaks highly of him, and Arteta doesn't give compliments like he gives to Eddie to anyone. So, you know, he's a good dude. I just think his time is gone because if Gabriel Jesus is going to be available next season, who I think actually is an opportunity to sell as well, I think Eddie might find it hard to find minutes, especially with all the Sesco talk as well. But Jesus, I'd give him a 6 as well, similar to Thomas Partey. Too big a player to have been missing for as long as he was missing, and I think, yeah, I'd give him a 6. Martinelli, give him a 7. I think he played okay. I think he had a bit of a difficult season, by the standard of progression that he had been showing since he's arrived at Arsenal. But I don't think, I think the 7 for me, offensively, I think he probably would have been, just if I was looking at just as an offensive player and looking at his offensive numbers, I would say his underlying numbers are still the same as they always have been, or at least as they were the previous year. But his execution was maybe a little bit off, not a little bit, actually, very off. However, Martinelli gives us something other players don't necessarily give us, especially on that side of the team. Also, defensively, the boy never cheats. He never cheats the paying fan out of, with his effort ever. So because of that, I would give him a 7 season. These young guys, the growth is not always going to be linear, and if I gave Odegaard a 10 after having not even repeated what he did last year, I think I need to be fair and be consistent. I think Martinelli will hopefully come back. I think he'll come back next year offensively. And then Saka, I'll give him a 9. Best attacking player at Arsenal, I would say. And Havertz, I'd give him a 9 as well. Leandro Trossard, I'd give him an 8. Arteta, I'll give him a 9. Yeah, I think Saka speaks for himself. Havertz, similar to Raya, I think if Havertz is not, and Saka don't do what they do after Dubai, Arsenal are not in that title race all the way till we might have collapsed around March, April like Liverpool did. But Saka and Havertz really, and Leandro Trossard, I'll give you an 8. Yeah, those 3 guys became the front 3 of choice, and they were good for us. That's it, guys. Talk to you at the next one.